You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and the New Statesman's associate political editor, Rachel Cunliffe. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. And many of the papers are leading with Labour's withdrawn support for their Rochdale candidate. The Daily Mail says Labour was forced to withdraw its support for Azhar Ali after the paper uncovered more of his anti-Semitic comments. The Guardian says the by-election was meant to be a key test for Sir Keir Starmer's party and that Azhar Ali will stand as a Labour candidate on the ballot paper, but if he's elected, he will not have the party whip. And the i-newspaper says this could hand the Tories or George Galloway an unlikely victory. With a different story, The Sun writes that Coronation Street star Bill Roache faces a High Court fight over his tax affairs after the newspaper revealed he owes HMRC over £500,000. The Financial Times leads with a story about founders and executives of the largest US private equity firms, such as Blackstone, have seen their share value rise by more than $40 billion over the past year, benefiting from fast rising interest rates. The Metro speaks to the head of a primary school in Liverpool, who says he can't hire new staff because he's legally obliged to have a £30,000 a year contract with a private finance initiative for the upkeep of the school's playing fields. The Telegraph leads with a story about how former Home Secretary Suella Braverman says white people must not be made to feel guilty for being white amid a row over claims that the countryside is racist. The Daily Express writes that doctors may soon be able to diagnose dementia up to 15 years before the first symptoms emerge. The paper says scientists have developed a blood test with 90% accuracy. And the Daily Star warns that the nation's favourite brew could be in short supply. Now, a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Rachel Cunliffe and Jack Elsom. Welcome again to both of you. Let's start with the front page of The Guardian. This is the breaking news tonight that Labour is withdrawing its support for the Rochdale by-election candidate Azhar Ali. His name will still be on the ballot paper and, as I understand it, Labour will still be next to his name, but they have withdrawn their support for him.
Yes, it's a complete shambles for Labour. They started the day sending out shadow ministers to stand resolutely behind their candidate, Azhar Ali, and they've ended the day essentially pulling all support for him. So they have withdrawn any sort of campaign resources into the area. Party activists have been stood down, and we understand he's been suspended as a member of the Labour Party. Although because of this shambles around the dither and delay, essentially the deadline has passed to remove him from the ballot, and so Azhar Ali's name will still be on there. It'll be next to the Labour logo, and so people will go there potentially under the impression that he is still the Labour candidate. However, if he gets elected, he will go into the House of Commons, he won't take the Labour whip, he will sit as an independent MP, and then potentially won't get reselected as the Rochdale candidate for the upcoming general election. So it's a complete mess Labour have got themselves into, and quite unnecessary in a week where actually Rishi Sunak should have been facing the pressure.
Rachel, was there anything else that they could have done, though, at this late stage?
Well, firstly, they could have vetted their candidates better, and I bet that they are wishing that they had done that. Obviously, that's something that would have to have happened earlier, but I think this raises some serious questions about the candidate selection process, and this is in one by-election. If they're selecting candidates now for a general election, particularly lots of candidates in seats where they're expected to win, safe Labour seats, are those candidate selection processes getting the scrutiny that we would like to see? And clearly the answer is no. In terms of could they have done anything, well, once the story broke over the weekend that the candidate had made these comments, it was already too late for them to change the candidate. However, they could have disowned the candidate at that point. They could have stopped supporting them, and they could have crucially not put shadow ministers out on the broadcast round saying, no, he's apologised, he's still the Labour candidate. So it's one of those instances where Labour are learning the lesson that if you are going to have to make a painful U-turn, the best thing you can do is make it promptly. You kill the story rather than have days and days of coverage, which is what we've seen here. It's actually quite similar to the story last week about Labour U-turning on its pledge to spend £28 billion on green investment. There was so much back and forth. Are they keeping it? Are they not keeping it? Keir Starmer came out on a Tuesday, I think, or a Monday, saying, no, we're definitely keeping it, only for it to be gone 2 days later. So it's another instance where if you have to make a painful decision, make it sooner rather than later.
But we read in the Mail that they've changed their minds, reportedly, because new comments, further comments have come to light that the Mail has revealed, and that really was the reason why they decided to withdraw support this evening.
Yeah, I think it was twofold. I think that definitely these latest comments reported by the Mail were the straw that broke the camel's back. And I think it also gave Labour insiders some cover almost to be able to ditch this candidate after spending the day defending him. And they can then go out and say, well, hang on a minute, the position still stood this morning. But obviously these new comments came to light and therefore we are in a position where we can ditch him. However, there has been a groundswell of pressure all day for Labour to disown this candidate. And I think it was really quite an unsustainable position for Keir Starmer to be in, because every time a shadow minister will be sent out on the airwaves, they wouldn't be able to talk about anything else other than this candidate. Do you still support him? Do you stand by his comments? We saw it with Nick Thomas-Symonds earlier, the shadow Cabinet Office Minister, getting into a right old pickle about why he made these comments. And as Rachel said, it really sort of speaks to Keir Starmer's decision-making here, because we got into the same row last week with the 28 billion. And I think that what people found quite bizarre about the reluctance to disown Azhar Ali immediately is that in the past 4 years, Keir Starmer, in his drive to get rid of the toxicity of the Corbyn era, has been incredibly ruthless in ditching any Labour MPs from his party who have, the faintest whiff of anti-Semitism, quite rightly. And so I think that people found it a bit odd that he didn't act with the same pace and urgency with this candidate. It was pretty obvious to a lot of us that this candidate would have to go, and I think that by delaying the decision, Keir Starmer has only made his position 10 times worse.
Rachel, do you think if these further comments hadn't come to light, we'd still be in the same position we are tonight?
I think it would have been very difficult for Labour to continue backing the candidate, given that the first revelations, the first comment that was revealed was a conspiracy theory that Israel allowed the October 7th attacks to happen, which is a horrific thing to say. And there are sitting Labour MPs, or rather sitting MPs, who have been heavily sanctioned by the Labour Party for making comments about Israel and Gaza. So it really did look like a double standard, one rule for sitting MPs, another rule for candidates. I think it's definitely true that the fact that it was obviously going to be a distraction every time Labour was asked about anything. Obviously, Labour doesn't want to be talking about it this week. Labour wants to be talking, or will want to be talking, about the other by-elections that we have on Thursday, where they are expected to take 2 seats off the Conservatives, one of which was considered a very, very safe Conservative seat. So I think if you have a situation where every time anyone from Labour gets on any broadcast round, this is the question that they're asked, that's untenable. So I think even if these extra comments hadn't come to light, they would still have had to drop the candidate, which obviously raises the question, why didn't they do it earlier?
Yeah.
And what does this mean for the Rochdale by-election in terms of the candidates? Or do we believe that Azhar Ali could still go ahead and win that?
Yeah, there's a high chance that he does. And I think that beforehand he was definitely the front runner, right? And there are still going to be some people who might not follow the cut and thrust of politics as closely as we do, see that he is the Labour candidate and put their tick next to his box. Obviously, George Galloway is also seen as doing very well in areas with big Muslim populations. And I think that probably it will be a two-horse race between those two at the moment.
And let's also remember that the other candidates in this particular by-election also have some baggage, shall we say.
Yeah.
Reform, which is Nigel Farage's populist party, they're running a candidate who was previously from Labour, who was suspended from Labour for sexting a teenager. The Green Party, I think, have also disowned their own candidate, who it turned out had made Islamophobic remarks. It's really not a good candidate selection for the people of Rochdale. And you'd hope that in a general election, all of those parties go away and look at their candidate selections and come back with some better options.
Could the Tories edge in, Jack?
I don't think so at the moment. I think that the Conservatives didn't hold this seat anyway, and it's seen that in even seats that they do hold, they haven't managed to cling on to them. So I'm not sure the Tories will be holding their breath to win Rochdale anytime soon.
Yeah, I think the most likely scenario is that the Labour candidate wins because voters don't realise that he is no longer the Labour candidate, takes his seat in the House of Commons as an independent, which is, you know, really surreal.
Yes.
How damaging, just very quickly from both of you, is this for the Labour Party?
I think it's quite damaging to Keir Starmer because it just feeds into this entire narrative that he is very incapable of making decisions, at least recently anyway. I think that he has actually managed to build up a quite good reputation with tackling anti-Semitism in his party. It's been hard fought. It's taken 4 years for him to burnish those credentials. But it takes just one bad case for all of that hard work to go up in smoke. You know, when Tony Blair was on the ascendancy into number 10, his mission to drag Labour back from the wilderness was often likened to carrying a priceless Ming vase across a slippery floor. It can come crashing down at any moment, no matter how close you are to the end. Keir Starmer now, he's within touching distance of number 10, needs to make sure that these pitfalls don't trip him up and that Ming vase doesn't come crashing down.
I would take a slightly different approach. I don't think this particular issue is going to be that disastrous for him. I don't think most voters outside of Rochdale are paying all that much attention to who the Labour candidate is then. But I do think Keir Starmer's indecision or his lack of ability to make a really tough decision and take the pain early on to let that story play out, that could really trip him up in future scenarios.
OK, Rachel and Jack, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, we'll look at schools being forced to spend money on private finance initiatives rather than hiring new staff. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview, still with me, Rachel Cunliffe and Jack Elsom. Let's take a look at the FT front page and the picture there covering the rescue of the 2 hostages in Rafah. There obviously casualties as a result of that. Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, the picture really speaks for itself there. So the Israeli Defence Force launched a mission to rescue 2 of the hostages, and they are only the 2nd and 3rd hostages that the IDF has managed to rescue in a mission like this. All the other hostages have been negotiated part of exchanges. And Netanyahu called it a perfect operation, praised the troops that went in. At least 67 Palestinians killed as part of that, and real questions being raised now about what Israel's plan is now for the city of Rafah. Over 1 million Palestinians sheltering there. Many of them have been displaced more than once already. Israel's line is that there are still Hamas strongholds in the area and that they have to act. There are still over 100 Israeli hostages that Hamas holds. No clear plan from Hamas on the return of those. But now Joe Biden and David Cameron and other world leaders using increasingly strong language to warn Israel that they need to know what the plan is and they need to show some more restraint than they have been so far.
The FT saying that a court in The Hague, meanwhile, has banned the export of spare parts for F-35 fighter jets to Israel. And the court has found a clear risk that serious violations of human rights law are being committed in the Gaza Strip with the use of Israel's F-35 fighter planes.
Yeah, and I think that just speaks to the latest attempt by the international community to send a message to Israel. It's obviously incredibly concerning what's happening in Gaza. And I think that a lot of Western leaders now are having to walk a bit of a tightrope because when this conflict first started, the Western world was fully behind Israel in its objectives to, 1, get their hostages back, and 2, root out the evil that is Hamas. The position has obviously shifted in the last few months because of the scenes unfolding in Gaza. I mean, I remember being on this show a couple of months ago when the IDF was telling Palestinians in Gaza to move south to Rafah because they were going to be launching strikes and their missions in the sort of central of Gaza. Now they're talking about going into Rafah, where obviously there is a humanitarian crisis. And we saw Lord Cameron out there today in no uncertain terms saying, do not do not do that. Joe Biden saying that the Israeli response is over the top. And so I think that a lot of Western leaders are still keen to give Israel their backing. However, actions in the past few weeks have given them pause for thought. And I think that the language coming out of both the White House, Downing Street, The Hague, as we're seeing this afternoon, should hopefully make Benjamin Netanyahu sit up and assess what he's doing.
And that line is to show restraint. Let's, we've just got about a minute. Let's have a look at this story on the front page of the Metro, Rachel. Playing field idiocy. What's the detail to this story?
This is absolutely extraordinary. This is a primary school that can't hire classroom staff because it is having to pay £30,000 a year on a contract, essentially, to cut the playing fields and to keep up the upkeep of the school, which was a contract negotiated when the private company helped build the school and helped finance it. This is a private finance initiative that obviously there were a Conservative policy from the 90s, ballooned under New Labour. And I think real questions here about how many contracts like this are there, how many schools are affected, and even if it is technically within the terms of the contract, I think the people in charge of those companies really ought to be brought before Parliament to answer some serious questions.
Yeah, indeed. We must leave it there just because of time, but thank you both, Jack and Rachel. We'll see you in the next hour.